Thank you very much. As Jacco introduced, my name is Flor Avelino from Delft in Rotterdam, so really close by. So I have 20 minutes, so I will jump right into it. Just very shortly, can you hear me, by the way? Do I need the thing, or is this okay? Yeah? Okay. So a little bit about the project. We are 12 research institutes. We are a 4-year research project. We are now a little bit after halfway. And we are research institutes from various different disciplines, from environmental science to transition theory, sociology, political theories, all sorts of different institutes across Europe and as well as Latin America. And we are a total 30 to 35 researchers. And because I only have 20 minutes, I will not go into the methodological and theoretical details of the entire project. We have lots of deliverables and working papers online if you're curious. But what I've been asked to do by Jacco is to go into this concept of social innovation, and particularly transformative social innovation. So that's what I'll try to do. So building on existing literature on social innovation, which is interchangeably defined as new social practices or new social relations, we define social innovation as a change in social relations involving new ways of doing, new ways of knowing, new ways of framing, and new ways of organizing. And obviously technology plays an important role. So using the term social innovation is not to deny the importance of technological innovation. If you look at the example of community energy, which has taken off in the past few years and has really had an explosive growth, obviously technology is very important in making this development possible. So windmills and solar panels are crucial to enable decentral energy production. But next to this technological innovation, you also clearly see that there is social innovation in the sense that there is new social relations being built between consumer and producers, between neighbors, between citizens and their local governments. And these kind of new social relations come with new practices, such as the practice of going to your roof with your neighbors and attending to your solar panels. Or it comes with new types of knowledge. You need new kind of skills and competences to be able to take care of such decentral energy. It also comes with new framing. So, for instance, the very word community energy is a new concept, as well as the word prosumer, which is kind of a mix between a consumer and a producer. So people invent new words. That's also a way of innovation. And last but not least, people also come up with new ways of organizing, such as, for instance, reinventing the cooperative. And here I very consciously use the word reinventing because, as we all know, there's nothing new about the cooperative. It has been around for centuries. But what is new is the way in which it is appropriated in the current context. So it's being rediscovered in the past few years, partly in response to the economic crisis. There has been kind of a revival of the cooperative. And you can see kind of similar dynamics when it comes to complementary currencies. Again, this idea of having new kinds of money, new kinds of currency, there's nothing new about it. Like the local exchange trading systems and local money has been around for several decades. But you see that you get new kind of combinations, such as the Brixton pound in London, where you can pay the local money with a mobile app, or the Bristol pound, where people are even allowed to pay their local taxes with the local money. So here you see new kind of combinations of an old phenomenon. And there's many more examples of social innovation. You could even say there's an explosion of social innovation initiatives in the past few decades. And this raises the question, what is the relation between all these different social innovations? And also, what is their impact on society? In the meantime, you see that an increasing amount of governments are facing global problems, global, national, local problems that are all intertwined. Whether we're talking about climate change or the economic crisis or all sorts of geopolitical tensions. And given the budget cuts and the austerity measures, you also see that a lot of governments are struggling to deal with this, and that there's this increasing expectation that social innovations can become instrumental in helping governments to deal with these issues. And you see these kind of expectations all around, such as, for instance, all sorts of European institutions that emphasize that social innovation will bring immediate solutions to the pressing social issues, and that they will empower people to deal with such societal challenges. Underlying these kind of expectations, these high expectations of social innovation, there is an assumption that social innovation can contribute to wider transformative change and that it can empower people. And of course, us being researchers in the project, we question this assumption and we ask how, under which conditions, and to what extent can social innovation contribute to such wider transformative change? And how are people empowered or disempowered to get there? And how do we conceptualize all these ideas? So I already told a little bit about how we conceptualize social innovation, but once we move on to transformative social innovation, what is it that we mean by transformative social innovation? We conceptualize that it's about the relation between the social innovation and the wider social context. And more specifically, we say that a social innovation is transformative to the extent that it challenges, alters, and/or replaces dominant institutions in that social context. And of course, there's all sorts of existing theories that already theorize these kind of relations. We build on transition theory and various other social and political theories on change and innovation to conceptualize that. So one way in which we unpack this social context is this idea of narratives of change, which we define in terms of societal discourses on change and innovation, sets of ideas, concepts, metaphors, and storylines about change and innovation. These kind of narratives of change, like social innovations, have narratives about what a new world could look like. And another phenomena in the social context is this idea of game changers. And game changers are macro developments that we perceive are kind of forcing us or driving us to change. For instance, the economic crisis or climate change. These are macro developments that we perceive are changing the rules of the game. And the interesting thing is that these narratives of change and these game changers co-evolve with each other. So if you take the example of the economic crisis, the narratives about a new economy that we see out there, on the one hand, they are a response to the economic crisis, but on the other hand, the way we perceive the economic crisis is also very much influenced by the stories that we tell about a new economy. And what you see is that social innovation initiatives play into this dynamics very smartly. For instance, the Transition Town Network, which Adina also mentioned, when they were founded in the 90s, they were really positioned as an answer to the challenges of peak oil as well as climate change later on. And then when the economic crisis hit in 2008, they also repositioned themselves as an answer to the economic crisis by providing local resilient economies. And this was not just a strategic reframing, it was also based on a genuine belief that in order to have a sustainable economy, we also need to be locally resilient. So it's this kind of agency in transformative social innovation that we are interested in. How people who are involved in initiatives and networks are influencing this dynamic between social innovation, societal challenges, and the broader societal context. And what we do in the Transit project, we study a total of 20 networks that are working on social innovation and that have transformative ambitions. These are transnational networks, meaning that they are globally connected, but they are very locally rooted. And we study each of the networks as a global network, but we also study the local manifestations. In total, we look at 20 global networks. We do 40 in-depth local case studies, and then we have a comparative analysis of 80 local case studies across 13 different countries in Europe and Latin America. To give you one example of such a local manifestation, what you see here is the Impact Hub Amsterdam, which is a co-working space, but it's more than that. It's also a place where social entrepreneurs meet to learn. So it's also, in a way, a sort of school for social entrepreneurs. It's also a sort of lab where they experiment with new ideas. And a lot of people, when they see this, for the first time, you see a bunch of hipsters working in a nice-looking place, and you don't really associate that with transformative impact. What a lot of people don't know is that the Impact Hub is part of a wider network of more than 70, I don't think you can see it here, so that's 73 impact hubs, 20 impact hubs in the making, in 49 different countries with a total of 11,000 members. So these are connected globally. And not only is there such a global network, locally, each of the impact hubs also has a whole movement around it in its own city. And the interesting thing about a network like this is that they have a very particular theory of change about how to stimulate innovation, how to create an ecosystem to enable social entrepreneurs to work on their social innovations and also to learn from each other how to accelerate the entrepreneurial journey, as they call it. This is one example. Another example is this one. What you see here is the website of Eco-Village Bergen, which is 1 hour above Amsterdam. An eco-village is defined as a human-scale settlement where people try to live in harmony with each other and with nature. And often what you see is that people buy a piece of unused land, such as this military terrain that they bought here, and they try to recreate the space into a vibrant green village. This is a picture of the Dutch Eco-Village Festival a few years ago, which was held at Ecodorp Bergen. And a lot of people, when they see this picture for the first time, they see a bunch of hippies across a campfire. They don't really see the transformative impact of it. But what most people don't know is that there is actually a whole global, that there's thousands of eco-village-like initiatives across the world. And not only are there thousands of these local initiatives, they are actually organized. For instance, in the Global Eco-Village Network, which has various sub-networks at each continent level. And these Global Eco-Village networks have websites where they, for instance, systematically share their local solutions with each other across the world. And also they cooperate with all sorts of educational institutions, not only schools and universities, but also with the United Nations, for instance, on giving executive courses for on sustainability leadership, or getting involved in European projects on capacity building for social innovation. So these were just 2 examples, the Impact Hub and the Eco-Village Network, but we study 18 others. And you see a large diversity, also what Adina mentioned, that you have various different fields of sustainability, such as food or energy services or agriculture. And we also look at networks that are more general about, for instance, participatory democracy or basic income, some more politically oriented, some more that are really about financing. And you see that even those networks that are not specifically about changing finance, even those that are not really specialized in that, you see that all networks that we study and all initiatives are convinced that in order to change the world, we need a new economy. And we compared the networks in terms of what kind of new economy they think we need. And we can see that there's kind of 4 rough clusters on new economy. First is the one on green economy through degrowth and localization. Second, this discourse on collaborative economy and sharing economy. Third, the idea of social entrepreneurship and social economy. And last but not least, solidarity economy. When you look at these 4, from a mainstream economics perspective, they look very similar, right? It's kind of all like alternative economics stuff. But when you zoom in and you really compare them, they are actually quite different. And you see that solidarity economy initiatives are actually quite critical of social entrepreneurship initiatives, because they argue that social entrepreneurship actually reproduces capitalist, neoliberal, etc. So there's actually quite some differences and disagreements between these different streams. And these different perspectives on new economy also demonstrate more general different theories of change about how change comes about. For instance, you can see a cluster of initiatives that really believe that change comes from incubating social entrepreneurs, empowering social entrepreneurs to bring good business into the market in a good way. Others emphasize much more that changing the world comes from really changing your daily lifestyles, like living in local resilient communities. They emphasize the community. And then there is another cluster that is much more about political reform, and that also believes much more in the need to replace the whole economic system by a more solidary one. Underlying these differences, there is, of course, they share their belief that social change requires new social relations, that it's about community building. And you also see that these relational values and principles across the networks have a lot of similarities about trust, reciprocity, connectedness, etc. There's this search for these kind of new kind of relations. And not only are these new relations about personal, interpersonal relations, it's also about institutional relations. So a lot of these initiatives and networks cross the boundaries of different institutional logics. So a lot of people think they're only in civil society, but often they also interact with government, business, or they even come from the market and the business sector. So it's really about changing relations between these sectors, about the changing relations between civil society, government, and market. And a lot of initiatives challenge these different institutional logics. For instance, the Impact Hub really challenges this division that we have between for-profit and non-profit. They do a lot of work on demonstrating that you can have non-profit and for-profit combined in one initiative. And by doing so, they also demand legal recognition for the social enterprise, which a lot of now us have heard of today, but actually 10 years ago, it was considered quite weird to have a social enterprise. The Global Eco-Village Network also challenges the way that we plan everything in a central and very bureaucratic way, and they are continuously challenging in every locality that they start the planning permissions and the construction regulations. So what you see is this intersection between the social innovation and the institutions. This is where it gets exciting, because on the one hand, this is the moment where social innovation can get captured and suppressed and lose its innovation, its innovative potential. But it's at the same time, that's the moment where the transformative potential can happen, because this is when institutional things are starting to change. So as our colleagues say, the institutionalization of social innovation is always between capture and transformation. So if you look at these examples of radical organic food and how it's now mainstreamed into the supermarkets, or eco-housing and how it has now been mainstreamed into the mainstream housing market. Some people would say this is a story of success, right? These social innovative initiatives have had impact on the market. Others would say, no, this isn't actually an example of capture. So what we are now focusing on in the current research that we're doing is on this kind of dialectic relation between social innovations. On the one hand, they challenge institutions, but on the other hand, they are also reproducing them. And often they lack an institutional home. Because they challenge institutions, they often don't fit. And this is often seen as a problem, but this is also kind of where the innovation comes from. Because when you don't fit, you try to invent something new. And you see that a lot of these initiatives also come up with new hybrid organizational forms. Because they don't fit, they invent new organizational forms. And my almost last slide. Because of all this dialectics and kind of political paradoxes, you see also that in order to survive and in order to have impact, these social innovations need to have a very creative combination of different political strategies. On the one hand, it's very much about cooperating with government, but on the other hand, you also need to be kind of hijacking or irritating, or you need to, you know, a lot of these initiatives have double roles. And they need to continuously update this portfolio of strategies, which is very tiring and challenging, which is why being in socially innovative initiatives can be so intensive, while at the same time also staying true to your core intentions. So this is what we're currently studying by building this database on critical turning points, which I'm not going to go into because my 20 minutes are actually up in 1 minute. But nevertheless, I think we can stop here. And I was asked to make one slide with discussion points. So I guess something that I would also like to learn from the other presentations is what are these critical turning points where initiatives cooperate with more mainstream governments, where you see a turning point on both sides. What are the political strategies, and do you see the same thing, that you need these kind of paradoxical combinations? And last but not least, I left out our transdisciplinary co-production ambitions, But of course, this is a big challenge. Like, how do you communicate insights such as in such a database in a useful way for these social initiatives? That's what we are now really thinking about. How to bring such a database alive in a way that people also really use it. So this is also something we can learn from, I think. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for another interesting presentation. I think there's time for one question of clarification, otherwise we move it to the larger discussion later on. Is there one urgent question? Yes, please.
Yes, now maybe you thought that the question is too much, but that's up to you. Now my name is Kate Overbeek. I am working at Wageningen University in research, and in particular at Leiden. I was interested by in the beginning you mentioned a core issue of social innovation is creating new social relations. I agree with that. And nowadays I see is also within the bio-based economy, then different sectors meet each other and they talk about crossovers. That's between, now mainly between producers. And maybe it is still a linear innovation. So they are more meeting each other, so more producers are meeting each other and do not meet NGOs or less. In your case, I would say, okay, you also stressed the new social relationships. However, it was more in sustainability initiatives. Did you, well, maybe your initiatives have a problem to scale up? However, also the others, the bio-based, the linear ones, had a problem. Do you have an idea, or did you notice that, or would you like to combine them at a certain moment?
Yeah, so this has been also a recurring discussion, especially in the beginning of the Transit project. We focused mostly on really grassroots networks, and this was also a conscious decision for this project. But then we already said we also want to have more attention for the interaction between governments and initiatives. So that's why we added, for instance, participatory democracy, which is also really what local governments are working on, but still that's quite local. So yeah, definitely my dream for future research, and I know there's a lot of research out there, is to really combine this with taking really local grassroots stuff and really comparing it to much more the things that you were describing, and then really see how you can put them together. Because if that doesn't happen, then social relations are not really changing in a way. Sorry.
Well, one very short question then, and a very short answer, please.
Okay, I'll try. One of the things that I find fascinating is the disconnect sometimes between these initiatives and the things that they care about, while being embedded in a global, neoclassical capitalist society which has still controlled by three continents. And I wonder, what is from the stories and interviews you heard, how do they relate to, it's for them impossible to disconnect from the rest of the global society, as much as they like to be autarkic and all of that stuff. And how much do they acknowledge that stuff, and how do they relate to it?
Well, that's the surprising thing. I know that's also why we really insisted on looking at these global networks, because there is this kind of stereotype of these initiatives wanting to be in their own bubble. And actually, I was really surprised by actually how much time they spent in being in relation to that network. And of course there is a bias there because we interview people that are into that. But each initiative often has a group of people in that initiative, not all of them, but a group of people that spends an amazing amount of time, voluntary time, to the network, the global network. So I think we really underestimate, especially these particular initiatives, how global and strategic they actually are.
Okay, thank you very much.